The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Beacon Hill Park, where Boston's elite gathered, while their children played among imported maple trees and artisanal playground equipment. Luxury vehicles crawled past the park's perimeter. Security personnel maintained discreet positions, and the wrought iron gates of Cambridge Preparatory Academy stood as a silent reminder that this space, like much of Beacon Hill, wasn't meant for everyone. Everyone except for a small, thin girl covered in city dust, who sat cross-legged on the ground with a bag of candy in her lap and watchful eyes that missed nothing. Nobody knew her name. They only knew she appeared sometimes to sell candy or help an elderly woman who begged for change at the corner of Chestnut and Walnut. She was a constant shadow, ignored by most who hurried past in designer coats with coffees that cost more than she earned in a day. Some of the nannies warned children to stay away, though they never explained why. The girl didn't bother anyone. She just watched and waited and survived. The late September breeze carried laughter across the park as children climbed on jungle gyms and chased each other through piles of fallen leaves. Parents and caretakers clustered on benches, alternating between superficial conversation and checking their phones. The girl noticed how none of them really watched the children, not in the way she watched everything. That's why on this particular Thursday, she saw something no one else did. A black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up along the eastern edge of the park, parking in a no-standing zone. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out, smoothed his tie, and opened the rear passenger door. He stood there for a moment, scanning the playground before calling out a name with practiced familiarity. "Ethan, hey buddy, your dad sent me to pick you up." A boy with sandy hair and a blue private school uniform hesitated at the edge of the sandbox. He was around 7, the same age the girl guessed herself to be, though she couldn't be certain. The boy's nanny sat 20 feet away, laughing at something on her phone, oblivious to the exchange. The girl was on her feet instantly. Something was wrong. She'd survived on Boston's streets long enough to recognize danger, and this man radiated it despite his polished appearance. She dropped her candy bag and sprinted across the playground, weaving between swing sets and startled children. She reached the boy just as he took a hesitant step toward the vehicle. Her small hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Don't go. He's not from your dad," she shouted, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet playground. The man's face hardened as he lunged forward, reaching for both children. "Mind your own business, street rat," he growled, grabbing for Ethan's uniform blazer. The girl's response was immediate and fierce. She sank her teeth into the man's outstretched arm, kicked his shin with all her might, and began screaming for help with such raw intensity that every head in the park turned. "Help! Kidnapper! Help us!" she shrieked, positioning her thin body between Ethan and the attacker. The commotion finally broke through the digital trance of the adults. Parents rushed forward. The nanny dropped her phone. Park security sprinted across the lawn. The man cursed, shoved the girl hard enough to send her sprawling onto the pavement, and dove back into the Escalade, which screeched away before anyone could record the license plate. The girl lay on the ground, scraped and bruised, but still protectively covering Ethan with her small frame. "Are you okay?" she whispered to the terrified boy, who nodded mutely, his eyes wide with shock. Within hours, the Boston Police Department confirmed what the girl had somehow known. It had been an attempted kidnapping. Ethan Harrison was the only son of William Harrison, the notoriously private founder of Harrison Systems, a tech conglomerate valued at billions. And the child who had saved him was a girl with no fixed address, no documentation, and no one to claim her when social services arrived. William Harrison was at the police station before sunset. His tailored suit couldn't hide the terror and gratitude battling across his face, as detectives explained how close he'd come to losing his son. "Where is she?" he asked when they finished their report. "The girl who saved Ethan." A detective led him to a small conference room where a social worker sat beside a tiny figure wrapped in a blanket too large for her frame. She looked even smaller under the fluorescent lights, her dark hair tangled, her clothes worn thin from countless washings in public restrooms. But her eyes, large, observant, unafraid, met his directly. William knelt before her, his voice thick with emotion. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl shrugged. "People call me Little," she said simply. "I can't write it, though." Her voice carried a hint of shame at this admission. William Harrison had built his fortune being decisive, and he made his decision in that moment. He glanced at the social worker. "I want to help her. What do I need to do?" The process wasn't simple, even for someone with his resources. There were evaluations, temporary placements, background checks, court appearances, but William Harrison moved mountains. He found the best child advocacy lawyers in Massachusetts. He personally appeared before judges. He created a foundation for homeless children, while he fought to bring one particular homeless child into his home. Emily, as she was officially named during the process, spent her first night in the Harrison mansion 3 months after saving Ethan. She stood in the doorway of a bedroom larger than any space she'd ever occupied, staring at the canopy bed with its cloud-soft comforter, at shelves lined with books and toys, at walls painted a gentle blue at her shy request. "Is this really for me?" she whispered to Rebecca Harrison, William's wife, who had initially been hesitant about the arrangement, but had slowly warmed to the serious little girl with watchful eyes. "All of it," Rebecca confirmed, squeezing Emily's thin shoulder. "And tomorrow we're going shopping for more clothes, and then we'll visit the school you'll be attending after the holidays." Emily nodded, but she didn't sleep that first night. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the security guards patrol the property, memorizing their patterns, just as she'd memorized the movements of everyone who passed through her territory on the streets. Old habits died hard. Across the hall, Ethan also lay awake, wondering about the strange girl who had appeared like a guardian angel. The next morning, he knocked on her door, holding a chocolate muffin he'd smuggled from breakfast. "I never said thank you," he said when she opened the door, still wearing the new pajamas that felt strangely soft against her skin. "For saving me from that bad man." Emily accepted the muffin, breaking it carefully in half and offering a portion back to him. It was instinctive. On the streets, you shared what little you had, or you didn't survive. "You can keep it all," Ethan said, but sat beside her anyway as she ate with the deliberate care of someone who had known hunger. "Why did you help me? You didn't even know me." Emily considered this as she chewed. When she finally spoke, her answer was simple but profound. "I know what it's like when no one helps." And in that moment, something shifted between them. A connection formed that would shape both their lives in ways neither could imagine. From that day forward, Ethan became Emily's fiercest advocate. He helped her learn to read, patiently sitting beside her for hours after school. He defended her against classmates who mocked her halting speech or unfamiliarity with technology. And Emily, in turn, brought a new perspective to his privileged world, a streetwise wisdom that made him question assumptions he'd never before noticed. As months turned to years, the girl once called Little grew into M, a quiet but determined presence in the Harrison household. She never fully lost her watchfulness, her habit of noticing details others missed, of listening when no one thought she was paying attention. And the Harrisons, who had initially seen themselves as her saviors, gradually realized that Emily had brought something irreplaceable into their lives, a reminder of resilience, of gratitude, of seeing the world as it truly was, rather than through the filter of privilege. None of them could have predicted how this vigilance would one day save them all again, in a way that would permanently alter the future of the Harrison legacy. 5 years passed, transforming the cautious street girl into a poised 12-year-old whose past was visible only in moments of startled watchfulness, or the way she still checked exits when entering unfamiliar spaces. Emily's integration into the Harrison family hadn't been without challenges. The first year brought nightmares that sent her screaming into the darkness, hoarding food in her closet, and occasional retreats into silence when overwhelmed by the mansion's grandeur. But the Harrisons persevered with patience and professional help. William hired child psychologists specializing in trauma and attachment. Rebecca, initially the most hesitant about the adoption, ultimately became Emily's fiercest advocate when teachers or other parents questioned her background. "My daughter," Rebecca would say firmly when introducing Emily at charity galas or school functions, her tone brooking no argument despite the obvious physical differences between her blonde elegance and Emily's olive complexion and dark eyes. Ethan, now 12 like his adopted sister, had developed a relationship with Emily that baffled many outsiders, but made perfect sense to the Harrison family. They weren't typical siblings who bickered over toys or territory. Instead, they operated as a unit, each filling gaps in the other's experience. Emily taught Ethan street smarts, how to tell when someone was lying, how to navigate unfamiliar neighborhoods, how to read the mood of a room before entering. Ethan taught Emily the unwritten rules of wealth, which fork to use at formal dinners, how to ride a horse during summers in the Berkshires, how to deflect unwanted questions about her past. On a crisp October afternoon, 5 years to the day since the attempted kidnapping, Emily sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor surrounded by textbooks. The space had evolved from the initial blue sanctuary to a reflection of her emerging personality. Walls lined with bookshelves, mathematical formulas scribbled on a whiteboard, a chess set perpetually mid-game on a small table by the window. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. "Enter," she called. Her formerly halting English now crisp and precise, the accent of Boston's elite carefully layered over her street vernacular. William Harrison stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He'd aged since bringing Emily home, silver threading through his dark hair, lines etching deeper around his eyes, but his presence still commanded attention. Today, however, he seemed unusually somber. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the floor beside her. Emily nodded, marking her place in the advanced calculus book she'd been studying, despite being years ahead of the material covered in her 7th grade math class. William lowered himself beside her with a slight grimace, a reminder that he wasn't as young as he sometimes pretended to be. 5 years today," he said quietly. "I never properly thanked you." Emily tilted her head, a gesture that had become her signature when puzzled. "You've given me everything," she replied. "A home, education, family. What more could gratitude possibly look like?" William smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what I wanted to discuss. I've been thinking about how to honor what you did for our family. Saying thank you seems insufficient." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This belonged to my grandmother. She was the strongest woman I've ever known, until I met you." Inside the box lay a pendant, a simple silver compass hanging from a delicate chain. Emily touched it hesitantly, her fingers tracing the cardinal directions. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "The compass reminds us that no matter where life takes us, we can always find our way home," William explained, his voice rough with emotion. "You found your way to us against impossible odds, Emily, and in doing so, you saved more than just Ethan that day." Emily allowed him to fasten the necklace around her neck, its weight unfamiliar but somehow right. She rarely accepted expensive gifts, preferring to downplay the family's wealth among her peers at Cambridge Prep, where she attended on scholarship, despite William's offers to pay full tuition. This, however, felt different, a connection to a family history she was still learning to claim as her own. Later that evening, during the small celebration Rebecca had arranged to mark what they now called Family Day, Emily found Ethan alone on the terrace, staring at the Boston skyline glittering beyond the mansion's manicured grounds. "Dad gave you Grandma Harrison's compass," he observed, nodding toward the pendant visible at her collar. "I'm glad. It suits you." Emily joined him at the railing. "I've been thinking about that day," she admitted. "What if I hadn't been there? What if I decided to sell candy somewhere else?" Ethan shook his head. "But you were there. That's what matters." His expression grew serious. "Have you ever wondered who was behind it? The kidnapping attempt?" Emily stiffened. The investigation had stalled years ago. The Escalade had been found abandoned with stolen plates. The man was never identified. The Harrisons had increased security and moved forward, but Emily had never stopped wondering. "Sometimes," she acknowledged carefully, "your father has powerful competitors." "And secrets," Ethan added, lowering his voice though they were alone. "I overheard him arguing with Uncle Victor last week. Something about offshore accounts and documentation that needed to disappear." Emily's internal alarm bells rang softly. Victor Blackwell wasn't actually Ethan's uncle, but William's oldest friend and business partner. He'd been part of Harrison Systems since its founding 20 years earlier, and now served as CFO, overseeing the company's increasingly complex financial operations. Victor had always been polite to Emily but maintained a certain distance. She'd caught him watching her with calculation several times over the years, especially when she asked questions about the business during dinner conversations. "What exactly did you hear?" she pressed, keeping her voice casual. Ethan shrugged. "Not much. They noticed me and stopped talking." Dad looked upset, though. Emily filed this information away, alongside other observations she'd been collecting about Harrison Systems. William had begun bringing her to the office occasionally, claiming she showed aptitude for business that shouldn't be wasted. During these visits, she'd absorbed everything: the company structure, the personalities of key executives, the rhythms of corporate politics. What had started as curiosity was evolving into genuine interest. At school, she'd begun taking business and accounting electives alongside her advanced math and science courses. Her academic counselor had been surprised by this combination, but Emily merely smiled and explained she found balance in numbers. Numbers never lied, even when people did. That night, after the celebration ended and the household settled into silence, Emily sat at her desk reviewing company annual reports William had offhandedly mentioned were public information. She wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for, but something about Ethan's mention of Victor Blackwell and offshore accounts nagged at her. Emily had learned long ago to trust her instincts. On the streets, intuition had kept her alive. In her new life, it continued to serve as her guide. 3 years later, 15-year-old Emily stood at the threshold of adulthood with the measured confidence of someone who had already faced life's harshest realities. Her academic achievements had surpassed even the Harrison family's expectations. Perfect scores on standardized tests, acceptance to exclusive summer programs at MIT, quiet leadership that earned respect from teachers and peers alike. But it was her growing involvement with Harrison Systems that truly marked her evolution. What had begun as occasional visits to William's office had developed into a structured internship program he created specifically for her, allowing her to rotate through different departments during school breaks. Today, she sat quietly in the corner of a board meeting, observing as she had been taught to do on the streets, invisibly, missing nothing. William was presenting quarterly results to the board of directors, with Victor Blackwell providing financial details with his characteristic precision. To most observers, the two men presented a united front of corporate success. But Emily noticed the tension in William's shoulders, the slight hesitation before he endorsed certain figures, the way his eyes didn't quite meet Victor's during key points of the presentation. After the meeting, as executives filed out of the conference room, Emily remained behind, organizing her notes with methodical care. Victor approached, his smile not reaching his eyes as he regarded the teenager who had become an unexpected fixture in the company. Absorbing it all, Emily? You're certainly William's protégé in that respect, always watching, always learning. There was something in his tone that set her on edge, a hint of challenge beneath the collegial words. Emily met his gaze directly. I find business fascinating, Mr. Blackwell, especially the financial aspects. Numbers tell stories if you know how to listen. Victor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Indeed they do, though sometimes the stories are quite complicated, too complicated for someone just starting out. He tapped his expensive watch. William indulges your presence here, but don't mistake observation for understanding. Some aspects of global business require years of experience to fully grasp. With a nod that felt more like dismissal than farewell, he departed, leaving Emily alone with the subtle warning that hummed beneath his words. That evening, she approached William in his home office, a space she rarely entered without invitation. I'd like to learn more about the subsidiary holdings, she said without preamble, particularly the offshore structures. William looked up from his computer, surprise flickering across his features. That's rather specific. Any particular reason? Emily chose her words carefully. In today's meeting, there were discrepancies in how the Caribbean entities were represented in the financial statements versus the tax documentation. Nothing obvious, but the numbers shifted slightly between presentations. William's expression changed from surprise to something more complex. Pride mingled with concern. You noticed that from the corner of the room? When she nodded, he sighed deeply. You have remarkable instincts, Emily. Always have. He studied her for a long moment before coming to a decision. Very well. I'll arrange for you to spend some time with the international finance team this summer. But, he cautioned, raising a finger, this stays between us for now. The offshore structure is sensitive. Victor manages those aspects and he's rather protective of his domain. Emily nodded, maintaining a neutral expression, despite the confirmation that her intuition had been correct. Something about the offshore entities warranted further investigation. And now, with William's blessing, she would have access to the information she needed. What she would do with that information remained to be seen. But Emily Henderson Harrison, once a nameless street child selling candy in Beacon Hill Park, had learned patience above all else. She could wait, observe, and prepare for whatever truth she might discover within the labyrinth of numbers that constituted her adoptive father's business empire. 3 years passed in a blur of academic achievements and deepening business acumen. Emily, now 18 and in her final semester at Cambridge Preparatory Academy, had blossomed into a young woman whose quiet intensity commanded attention in any room she entered. She'd maintained her position at the top of her class while simultaneously expanding her role within Harrison Systems, where she now spent every free moment not dedicated to her studies. Her bedroom had transformed into a makeshift office, walls covered with organizational charts, financial projections, and industry analyses that would have impressed seasoned MBAs. The silver compass pendant from William never left her neck, a constant reminder of both where she'd come from and the direction she was determined to follow. On a rainy Tuesday in March, Emily sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by financial statements and annual reports dating back 5 years. Her laptop displayed multiple spreadsheets where she'd been meticulously tracking anomalous patterns in the company's secondary holding structures. The very entities Victor Blackwell had warned were too complicated for her understanding. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, not looking up from her notes. Ethan entered, his lanky 6-foot frame filling the doorway. At 18, he'd grown into a thoughtful young man who balanced his father's business instincts with his mother's diplomatic charm. Unlike Emily, who had thrown herself into the corporate world, Ethan had developed passionate interests in environmental science and sustainable development, areas he hoped to incorporate into Harrison Systems' future. "Still playing detective?" he asked, gesturing at the papers surrounding her. Emily smiled faintly. "Financial forensics isn't playing. It's methodical analysis." She stretched, rolling her shoulders to release the tension of hours hunched over documents. "What brings you to my lair?" Ethan's expression turned serious as he closed the door behind him. "Dad's been acting strange lately. Have you noticed?" Emily nodded slowly. She'd observed William's increasing distraction, the dark circles under his eyes, the private calls that ended abruptly when others entered his office. "He's worried about something. Or someone," Ethan suggested, lowering his voice though they were alone. "I think it has to do with Uncle Victor. They barely speak at family dinners anymore, and yesterday I overheard Dad on the phone saying something about irrefutable evidence and betrayal of trust." Emily felt her pulse quicken. For 3 years, she'd been quietly investigating discrepancies in the company's secondary holdings, the Caribbean-based entities that handled international contracts and partnerships. What had begun as curiosity sparked by Ethan's overheard conversation years ago had evolved into something more concerning. The numbers didn't align. Funds flowed through the offshore structures in patterns that defied normal business operations. And at the center of it all was Victor Blackwell, whose signature authorized every transaction. "I need to talk to your father," she said, decision crystallizing. "Tonight." Later that evening, Emily knocked on William's home office door, steeling herself for a conversation she'd been preparing for months. When his tired voice bade her enter, she found him standing at the window, silhouette outlined against the Boston skyline, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Emily," he said, turning with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, "shouldn't you be studying for finals?" "This is more important," she replied, closing the door firmly behind her. From her messenger bag, she withdrew a leather portfolio containing printouts, highlighted financial statements, and her own detailed analyses. "We need to discuss Victor Blackwell and the Caribbean holdings." William's smile vanished. "What have you done, Emily?" The question held no accusation, only weary resignation, as if he'd been expecting this moment. Emily laid out her evidence methodically, as she'd been taught in the debate team and Model UN competitions where she'd excelled. The pattern was clear. Over the past 7 years, nearly $40 million had been systematically diverted from Harrison Systems through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and fabricated consulting contracts. All roads led to shadow companies, where Victor Blackwell was the hidden beneficiary. "He's been stealing from you," Emily concluded, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she'd uncovered. using his position as CFO and your trust in him to orchestrate a sophisticated embezzlement scheme. William didn't seem surprised, only defeated. He sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every day of his 53 years. I know. Emily stared at him, momentarily speechless. You know, for how long? I've suspected for about 6 months, William admitted, but I lacked definitive proof. Victor has been careful, covering his tracks, using his knowledge of our financial systems to hide his activities. He gestured to her portfolio. Is your evidence conclusive? Emily nodded firmly. Beyond reasonable doubt. I've triple-checked everything. Cross-referenced with banking records, traced the money flows. It's all documented. A ghost of pride flickered across William's exhausted features. Of course you have. He reached for her analysis, thumbing through pages of meticulous work. You've accomplished in your spare time what forensic accountants would charge millions to uncover. His voice cracked slightly. You've saved us again, Emily. First Ethan, now this. Emily felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. Why didn't you tell me you suspected him? I could have focused my investigation, saved time. William shook his head slowly. Victor was my oldest friend. We built this company together from nothing. I needed to be certain before making accusations. He paused, studying her with new intensity. And I wanted to see if you'd find it on your own. You've been tracking the Caribbean entities for years. Did you think I didn't notice? Emily flushed, suddenly feeling like the street child caught where she shouldn't be. I thought I was being discreet. William's laugh held little humor. You were, but I've learned to watch you as carefully as you watch everything else. He set down his scotch, decision visibly forming. Tomorrow morning we confront Victor. Together. You've earned that right. The next day dawned with ominous grey clouds hanging over Boston's financial district. Emily dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal pantsuit that mimicked the conservative style favored by female executives, her compass pendant visible at her collar, her dark hair swept into a simple chignon. She looked older than 18, which was precisely her intention. When she joined William in the town car that would take them to Harrison Systems headquarters, neither spoke. The weight of the coming confrontation settled between them like a physical presence. Victor Blackwell was waiting in William's office when they arrived, his confusion at Emily's presence evident in his tight smile. A family meeting? He asked lightly, though his eyes narrowed at the portfolio clutched in Emily's hands. Of sorts, William replied, gesturing for his CFO to sit, while Emily quietly closed the door. What followed was the most difficult hour of Emily's new life. William began formally, outlining the allegations with the controlled precision of someone who had rehearsed painful words. Victor's initial denials gave way to technical explanations, then to anger, when Emily systematically dismantled each defense with documentary evidence. Finally, when the truth became undeniable, came the justifications. You've become too cautious, Will, Victor argued, desperation edging his voice. The company could have expanded faster, taken more risks. I was just creating a separate fund for opportunities you were too conservative to pursue. By stealing? William asked quietly. From the company? From my family? Victor's gaze darted to Emily, sudden venom replacing his usual polished demeanor. Family? You mean your charity case? The street rat you brought home like a stray puppy? He laughed bitterly. I knew from the beginning she'd be trouble, watching everything, those calculating eyes missing nothing. Do you know what she's really after, Will? Your empire. She's playing a longer game than I ever could. Emily maintained her composure, though the words stung with an echo of old wounds. The difference, Mr. Blackwell, is that I've never had to steal what was freely offered to me. Loyalty earns more than deception ever could. William ended the confrontation with quiet finality. There would be no criminal charges, the scandal would damage the company too severely, but Victor would resign immediately, return the embezzled funds, and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, he would avoid prosecution and public disgrace. As security escorted the former CFO from the building, Emily stood beside William at the window, watching Victor's diminished figure enter a taxi 40 floors below. He'll fulfill the agreement, William said, more to himself than to Emily. He has too much to lose otherwise. Emily turned to study the man who had transformed her life with a single decision 8 years earlier. What now? She asked softly. William straightened his shoulders, the weight of betrayal still evident but determination returning to his stance. Now we rebuild. The board will need reassurance. The financial team will need leadership. The subsidiaries will need restructuring. He turned to face her fully. And you, Emily, will need to decide your role in all of this. Emily blinked in surprise. My role? I'm still in high school. I haven't even started college. William shook his head, a genuine smile breaking through his weariness for the first time in weeks. You've demonstrated more business acumen and ethical leadership in the past 24 hours than most executives develop in decades. Harvard will still be there in a few years if you want it. Right now, Harrison Systems needs you more. He gestured toward the door that led to the executive suite. I'm offering you a position, special assistant to the CEO. Work directly with me while we clean up this mess and strengthen the company against future vulnerabilities. Emily felt dizzy with the suddenness of the offer. The board would never approve. I'm 18 with no degree, no official qualifications. The board will approve whatever I tell them to approve after you just saved the company $40 million, William countered. Besides, your title would be largely ceremonial at first. The real work and the real learning would happen behind closed doors. He paused, studying her reaction. Unless you'd prefer the traditional path. College, business school, working your way up from entry-level positions. That option remains open if you want it. Emily touched the compass at her throat, weighing the unexpected fork in her path. The traditional route offered safety, predictability, external validation. The position William offered meant diving into the deep end, learning through immersion, and helping to save the company that had given her a second chance at life. Her decision, when it came, felt like returning to herself after a long journey. When do I start? The transformation began immediately. William announced Victor's resignation, citing personal reasons while privately briefing key board members on the actual circumstances. Emily's position was created with minimal fanfare, just another line item in the organizational restructuring that followed. To the outside world, she appeared to be little more than William's protégé, perhaps given a ceremonial role due to family connections. Behind closed doors, however, Emily became indispensable. She worked alongside forensic accountants to untangle Victor's web of financial deception. She helped redesign internal controls to prevent similar vulnerabilities. She sat silently in board meetings, absorbing the politics and personalities that drove corporate decision-making. And each night, she returned to the mansion on Beacon Hill, where she balanced her new responsibilities with completing her final semester of high school. Ethan watched her evolution with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're becoming a corporate warrior," he observed one evening, finding her surrounded by prospectuses and governance policies in the family library. "Don't forget there's a world beyond balance sheets." Emily looked up from her work, realizing she'd barely spoken to him in weeks. "I haven't forgotten," she assured him. "I'm just finding your purpose," he finished for her, understanding in his eyes. "Dad told me what you did about Uncle Victor." His expression darkened momentarily. "I can't believe he betrayed our family like that." "People rationalize their worst actions," Emily replied, wisdom beyond her years coloring her words. Victor convinced himself he deserved more than he was given. Ethan studied her with sudden intensity. "Is that why you work 18-hour days now? To prove you deserve what you've been given?" The question landed like a physical blow, exposing insecurities Emily thought she'd buried years ago. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Maybe," she admitted softly. "Or maybe I'm still that girl in the park, trying to protect what matters most to me." Ethan crossed the room, resting his hand on her shoulder. "You saved me once from a kidnapper. You saved our family from Victor. You don't have anything left to prove, Em." But as graduation approached and Emily's role at Harrison Systems solidified, she knew there was still one final challenge ahead, the formal acknowledgement of her place in the company and the family that had become her own. The true test would come at the annual shareholders meeting, where William had planned an announcement that would shock Boston's business community and forever change the trajectory of both Emily's life and the Harrison legacy. The grand ballroom of the Boston Harbor Hotel buzzed with anticipation as shareholders, board members, and financial press gathered for Harrison Systems' annual meeting. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elegant floral arrangements, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered dramatic views of the harbor at sunset. This year's event carried unusual significance. the first major corporate gathering since Victor Blackwell's abrupt departure 3 months earlier. Emily stood in the wings of the stage, adjusting her navy blue suit and touching the compass pendant for reassurance. At 18, she remained the youngest person in the room by at least a decade, yet the past months had aged her in ways that transcended chronology. She'd spent countless hours rebuilding the company's financial infrastructure, implementing new oversight protocols, and quietly strengthening relationships with key stakeholders who'd been rattled by the undisclosed restructuring. William approached resplendent in his trademark charcoal suit, confidence radiating from his tall frame. "Nervous?" he asked, straightening his already perfect tie. Emily shook her head. "Focused," she corrected, though her racing pulse betrayed the magnitude of the moment. Tonight, William would publicly acknowledge her role in saving Harrison Systems and announce her official position moving forward. The murmurs of speculation had been building for weeks. Who would replace Victor as CFO? Would William bring in an industry veteran or promote from within? No one suspected the truth. "Remember," William said quietly, "there will be resistance. Questions about your age, your experience, your background. Some will see only the street child I brought home 8 years ago." Emily met his gaze steadily. "Let them. I've faced worse judgments." William smiled, pride evident in the crinkles around his eyes. "Indeed you have." The lights dimmed, signaling the start of proceedings. William squeezed her shoulder before walking onto the stage to thunderous applause. Emily watched from the shadows as he delivered the expected review of the company's performance. Record profits despite organizational challenges, successful expansion into emerging markets, promising research and development pipelines. Standard corporate rhetoric that revealed nothing of the near catastrophe they'd narrowly averted. Finally, William reached the moment the room had been waiting for. As many of you know, Harrison Systems experienced significant leadership changes this year. Victor Blackwell, our CFO and my friend of 20 years, stepped down to pursue other opportunities. The practiced euphemism drew knowing smiles from those familiar with corporate politics. Most assumed Victor had simply been poached by a competitor, while the select few board members who knew the truth maintained carefully neutral expressions. "This transition prompted a thorough review of our executive structure," William continued. "After considerable reflection and consultation with the board, I've decided to create a new position, Executive Vice President of Strategic Operations." Murmurs rippled through the audience. This was unexpected. "This role will oversee our international holdings, financial compliance, and long-term strategic planning, essentially serving as my right hand and potential successor." The murmurs grew louder. Succession planning was rarely discussed so openly, particularly when William showed no signs of stepping down. "The person I've selected for this position demonstrated extraordinary insight by identifying financial irregularities that might have cost this company millions if left unchecked." William paused, allowing the implication to sink in. "They then worked tirelessly to implement new safeguards and controls, strengthening our organization against future vulnerabilities." The audience leaned forward collectively, speculation visible on faces throughout the ballroom. Which financial genius had William poached from a competitor? Which industry veteran had saved Harrison Systems from disaster? This individual embodies the core values upon which I built this company: integrity, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. William smiled, extending his hand toward the wings. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Harrison Systems' new Executive Vice President of Strategic Operations, my daughter, Emily Henderson Harrison." The silence that followed Emily's entrance was profound enough to hear the gentle clink of ice in water glasses. She walked across the stage with measured confidence, shaking William's hand formally, before turning to face the stunned audience. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then, from the front row, Rebecca Harrison stood and began to applaud. Ethan joined her immediately. 2 board members followed, then another, until gradually the entire room rose in a standing ovation that seemed equal parts respect and bewilderment. Emily stepped to the microphone, waiting for silence to return. "Thank you for this extraordinary welcome," she began, her voice steady despite the hundreds of evaluating gazes fixed upon her. "I recognize that my appointment raises questions. I'm young. I lack traditional credentials. Some of you may wonder what qualifies me for this position." She paused, scanning the room deliberately. The answer is simple. I see patterns others miss. I understand systems, how they work, how they fail, and how they can be strengthened. She proceeded to outline in precise technical detail the vulnerabilities she'd identified in the company's financial structures and the solutions she'd implemented. Her explanation demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of corporate finance that even the most skeptical executives found themselves nodding in reluctant agreement. Harvard Business School will still be there when I'm ready, she concluded, a hint of humor softening her serious demeanor. But right now, Harrison Systems needs leadership that combines institutional knowledge with fresh perspective. I am honored by this opportunity and fully committed to earning your confidence. As she stepped away from the podium, the applause resumed, more measured than before but tinged with genuine respect. Throughout the dinner that followed, Emily navigated a gauntlet of introductions, fielding probing questions with the poise of someone twice her age. Board members who had initially frowned at her appointment began to reconsider as they engaged with her incisive intellect. Financial reporters circled like curious sharks, sensing a compelling story behind William's unprecedented decision. By midnight, when the event finally concluded, Emily's voice was hoarse from conversation, and her cheeks ached from maintaining a professional smile. In the town car returning to Beacon Hill, the Harrison family finally relaxed. "You were magnificent," Rebecca said, squeezing Emily's hand. "Even Jameson was impressed, and that old dinosaur questions everything William does." "The financial press will have a field day," William acknowledged, loosening his tie. "The Wall Street Journal already requested an exclusive interview with both of us. Street Child to Executive Suite, the Emily Henderson Harrison story." Emily winced. "I'd prefer they focus on my work, not my background." "Your background is what makes your accomplishments so extraordinary," Ethan countered. "Besides, you'll inspire other kids from difficult circumstances." Emily leaned back against the leather seat, suddenly exhausted. The compass pendant felt heavy against her collarbone, a physical reminder of how far she'd come, and how far she still had to go to prove herself worthy of the faith William had placed in her. The weeks following the announcement tested Emily's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. The business press vacillated between fascination with her unlikely story and skepticism about her qualifications. Competitors whispered that William Harrison had lost his edge, making emotional decisions rather than strategic ones. Several mid-level executives resigned rather than report to a teenager, regardless of her abilities. Through it all, Emily maintained the watchful calm that had defined her since childhood. She arrived at the office before dawn and left long after sunset, mastering every aspect of Harrison Systems' complex operations. She met with department heads individually, listening more than speaking, identifying their concerns before they voiced them. She studied industry reports, competitor analyses, and market projections with the same intensity she'd once applied to watching for danger on Boston's streets. Most importantly, she delivered results. Under her oversight, the financial controls she'd implemented uncovered additional smaller irregularities that had been overshadowed by Victor's larger scheme. She negotiated the successful acquisition of a struggling tech startup that brought valuable patents into the Harrison portfolio. She streamlined reporting structures that had grown unwieldy over years of expansion. Gradually, respect replaced reservation. The same executives who had questioned her appointment began seeking her input on strategic decisions. Board members who had initially humored her out of deference to William now solicited her analysis of complex business challenges. Even the financial press, always hungry for signs of failure, grudgingly acknowledged her competence in their quarterly assessments. 6 months into her tenure, Emily sat in her office reviewing acquisition proposals when her assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Mr. Jenkins from First Boston Capital is here. He doesn't have an appointment." Emily frowned. Terence Jenkins was Victor Blackwell's closest ally on the board, the only director who had consistently opposed her appointment and questioned her decisions. "Send him in," she said, closing her laptop to give the visitor her full attention. Jenkins entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to intimidating subordinates. At 62, he represented old-school Boston finance, Harvard-educated, socially connected, inherently suspicious of outsiders. "Ms. Henderson Harrison," he began, declining her invitation to sit. "I'll be brief. I've received concerning information about your methods." Emily maintained a neutral expression. "Please elaborate, Mr. Jenkins." He withdrew a folded document from his breast pocket. "This appears to be a confidential memo regarding our planned acquisition of Nexus Technologies. A memo that was discussed only in closed board sessions, yet somehow reached our primary competitor." His implication hung in the air between them. "Are you suggesting I leaked confidential information, Mr. Jenkins?" Emily asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm suggesting," he replied carefully, "that your rapid rise to power might have involved compromises. Victor Blackwell has shared some rather troubling theories about how you gained William's trust so completely." Emily felt a cold clarity descend, the same focused awareness that had guided her on the streets when danger approached. "I see. And did Victor also share why he resigned so abruptly? The millions he embezzled through fabricated consulting contracts? The offshore accounts in his wife's maiden name?" Jenkins blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Those are unsubstantiated rumors." "They are documented facts," Emily interrupted, rising from her chair. "Facts I personally uncovered and presented to William and the executive committee. Facts that would have destroyed this company's reputation if made public." She stepped around her desk, every movement deliberate. "Mr. Jenkins, I understand loyalty to old friends, but I suggest you carefully consider whether Victor Blackwell deserves yours." She held out her hand for the document. "Now I'll investigate this apparent leak with the seriousness it deserves. I assume you'll want a full report at the next board meeting." Jenkins relinquished the paper reluctantly, studying her with new uncertainty. "This isn't personal," he said finally. "I have a fiduciary responsibility to question decisions that seem unconventional." "Nothing about my story is conventional," Emily acknowledged, "but my commitment to Harrison Systems is absolute. Judge me by my results, Mr. Jenkins, not by Victor Blackwell's resentments." After he departed, Emily remained standing by the window, looking out at Boston's financial district spread below. The confrontation had crystallized something she'd sensed since accepting her position. Victor's shadow still lingered. His influence, his connections, his knowledge of company secrets, all remained potential weapons against her, and by extension, against William and the company they both served. That evening, she raised the issue with William in his home office. "Jenkins approached me today," she explained, outlining the implied accusation and her response. William's expression darkened. "Victor's still trying to undermine us. I should have expected that." "He knows too much," Emily said bluntly, "about the company, about our vulnerabilities. As long as he's free to whisper in people's ears, we're at risk." William nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" Emily felt the weight of the moment. The first time William had asked for her strategic advice, rather than simply valuing her observations. "We need to neutralize him completely," she said, "not through confrontation, but by systematically removing his remaining influence, starting with a full board briefing on exactly what he did." William looked troubled. "The non-disclosure agreement protects him from public exposure," Emily finished, "but the board deserves to know precisely what happened if they're going to face his allies with open eyes." She leaned forward intently. "It's time to bring everything into the light, William. Not just Victor's embezzlement, but my role in uncovering it. No more vague references to financial irregularities I helped identify. The complete truth." The plan she outlined was bold, a comprehensive presentation to the full board detailing Victor's scheme, the evidence against him, and the steps taken to recover the embezzled funds. Transparency that would silence the whispers once and for all. William listened thoughtfully, asking occasional questions that tested the strength of her strategy. When she finished, he smiled with quiet pride. "You've come so far from that watchful child in the park," he said softly. "But you've never lost what made you special even then. The ability to see what others miss, and the courage to act on what you see." He nodded decisively. "Schedule the briefing. It's time we put Victor Blackwell firmly in our past." What neither of them realized was that Victor had already set in motion a counter-move, one designed to destroy not just Emily's credibility, but the entire foundation of trust upon which the Harrison family had been rebuilt. As Emily prepared her presentation for the board, a more personal battle loomed on the horizon, one that would test not just her business acumen, but the very identity she had so carefully constructed from the fragments of her past. The morning of the board presentation dawned with ominous grey clouds gathering over Boston Harbor. Emily stood at her bedroom window, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass, while she mentally rehearsed her carefully prepared remarks. The silver compass hung against her skin, a talisman against the uncertainty that swirled within her, despite her outward confidence. Today would determine whether her position at Harrison Systems, and perhaps within the Harrison family itself, would be cemented or irreparably damaged. Her phone chimed with a text from William. "Car arriving in 30. Ready?" She typed back a simple, "Always," before turning to check her appearance one final time. The navy suit projected authority. The minimal jewelry spoke of seriousness. The subtle makeup concealed the fact she'd barely slept. Only her eyes revealed her true state, watchful, alert, prepared for whatever challenge might emerge. Downstairs, she found Ethan waiting in the foyer, dressed in an uncharacteristically formal suit. "You're coming to the board meeting?" she asked, surprise momentarily displacing her carefully maintained composure. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he replied with a grim smile. "Dad told me what you're doing today, what you're risking." Emily tilted her head questioningly. "I'm not risking anything." "I'm simply telling the truth. The truth about Victor means exposing how deeply he betrayed Dad's trust," Ethan reminded her. "It's humiliating for the great William Harrison to admit he was fooled for years by his closest friend. Some board members might question his judgment." Emily hadn't considered this angle. She'd been so focused on neutralizing Victor's lingering influence that she'd overlooked the potential impact on William's reputation. Before she could respond, Rebecca descended the staircase, also formally dressed. "We're all attending," she announced, adjusting an earring with practiced elegance. "This is a family matter as much as a business one." Emily felt a sudden tightness in her throat. After nearly 9 years with the Harrisons, there were still moments when their unwavering support caught her off guard, flashes of belonging that overwhelmed the stubborn remnants of the street child who'd expected nothing from anyone. "Thank you," she managed, the simple words carrying the weight of years of gratitude. William joined them moments later, and together the Harrison family departed for the corporate headquarters downtown. The boardroom at Harrison Systems occupied the entire northeast corner of the top floor, with panoramic views of the city and harbor beyond. Today, however, the motorized blinds were drawn against the storm, creating an atmosphere of cloistered intensity as board members filed in and took their assigned seats around the polished mahogany table. Emily noted their expressions, some curious, others wary, a few openly hostile. Terence Jenkins sat directly opposite her, his face an unreadable mask. William called the meeting to order with practiced authority. "Before we address the regular agenda, I've asked Emily to present some important information regarding the financial irregularities discovered earlier this year. This briefing is confidential and subject to the board's non-disclosure obligations." He nodded to Emily, yielding the floor with a gesture of confidence that steadied her nerves. For the next 40 minutes, Emily delivered the most important presentation of her young career. With methodical precision, she outlined Victor Blackwell's embezzlement scheme, the falsified consulting contracts, the cascading transfers through offshore entities, the systematic theft that had continued for nearly 7 years before she detected the pattern. She presented bank records, transaction logs, and forensic accounting reports, building an ironclad case that left no room for doubt or misinterpretation. Throughout her presentation, she was careful to focus on facts rather than emotions, on evidence rather than accusations. Only when describing how the company had recovered the stolen funds and implemented new protective measures did she allow a hint of personal pride to color her words. As she concluded, the boardroom remained silent, directors processing the magnitude of what they'd heard. Then Terence Jenkins cleared his throat. "This is certainly comprehensive, Ms. Henderson Harrison, but it raises an obvious question." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Why wasn't this information shared with the full board when it was discovered? Why the secrecy?" William began to respond, but Emily touched his arm gently, silently asking permission to handle the challenge herself. "2 reasons, Mr. Jenkins. First, the legal agreement securing Mr. Blackwell's cooperation and the return of the embezzled funds required confidentiality. Second," she continued, meeting his gaze directly, We needed time to verify that no other executives were involved in the scheme. Her implication hung in the air, causing several directors to shift uncomfortably. "Are you suggesting?" Jenkins began, color rising in his face. "I'm stating a fact," Emily interrupted calmly. "When $40 million disappears over 7 years, it's prudent to investigate whether the responsible party had accomplices." Another director, Patricia Whitmore, a retired federal judge who had joined the board at Williams' request, raised her hand slightly. "I appreciate the thoroughness of this presentation, Ms. Henderson Harrison. But I'm curious, how did you initially detect these irregularities? They seem deliberately structured to evade conventional oversight." Emily hesitated, glancing at William, who nodded encouragingly. "I've been observing Harrison Systems operations since I was 12, she admitted. "Not formally, but through conversations with William, through company materials he shared as part of my business education. I noticed discrepancies in how the Caribbean subsidiaries were represented in different financial statements, subtle inconsistencies that most people would overlook." She touched her compass pendant unconsciously. "On the streets, noticing details others miss isn't just a skill, it's survival. I applied that same vigilance to protecting the Harrison family and their company." A murmur rippled through the boardroom. Some directors visibly moved by this reminder of Emily's extraordinary journey, others clearly uncomfortable with the personal element she'd introduced to the proceedings. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door opened unexpectedly. All heads turned as Victor Blackwell himself walked confidently into the room, followed by a woman Emily recognized as the board's corporate secretary, looking flustered at this breach of protocol. "Forgive the interruption," Victor said smoothly, his tailored suit and practiced smile projecting the same polished professionalism that had concealed his theft for years. "But I believe my perspective might be valuable to this discussion." William stood abruptly. "This is a closed board meeting, Victor. You're no longer welcome here." Victor's smile never wavered. "Actually, William, as a significant shareholder, I have certain rights to address the board when my interests are being discussed. Your corporate secretary just confirmed this." He placed a leather portfolio on the table. "Especially when I have information directly relevant to the current presentation." The tension in the room intensified as directors exchanged uncertain glances. Patricia Whitmore frowned. "What information could possibly contextualize embezzlement, Mr. Blackwell?" Victor's gaze fixed on Emily. "Not embezzlement, Judge Whitmore. Identity theft." A collective intake of breath punctuated the accusation. Emily felt her pulse accelerate but maintained her outward calm, recognizing the moment of danger as clearly as she once had on Boston's unforgiving streets. "Emily Henderson Harrison isn't who she claims to be," Victor continued, opening his portfolio. "Or rather, she's someone quite different from the street orphan William romantically portrayed when he took her in." He extracted a document, sliding it across the table toward Judge Whitmore. "This is a birth certificate for Emily Margaret Blackwell, my niece who disappeared from her foster home in South Boston 9 years ago, shortly before a mysterious street child conveniently saved Ethan Harrison from a kidnapping attempt. The bombshell landed with devastating impact." Board members stared at Emily in shocked confusion, while William stepped protectively closer to her, face flushed with anger. "This is absurd, Victor. A desperate attempt to discredit—" "Is it?" Victor interrupted, producing more documents. "DNA testing confirms her identity. Hospital records match the childhood scars on her left arm. And most compelling, the testimony of her former foster mother, who recognized her immediately when shown recent photographs." Emily felt the room spinning slightly as long-buried memories surfaced. Fragmented images of a house in South Boston, a woman's harsh voice, bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. She had been so young when she fled, her name one of many things she'd chosen to forget in order to survive. "She orchestrated the entire scenario," Victor pressed, sensing the board's wavering attention. "The kidnapping that never existed, the miraculous rescue, the calculated integration into the Harrison family, and ultimately, the systematic campaign to discredit me when I began questioning her influence over William." Emily found her voice, surprising herself with its steadiness. "You're claiming I planned all this as a 9-year-old child? That I somehow arranged a fake kidnapping, anticipated William's gratitude, and plotted a 9-year strategy to eventually frame you for embezzlement?" She shook her head slightly. Your desperation is showing, Mr. Blackwell. Victor's expression hardened. Children are often pawns in complex adult schemes. Perhaps you were placed there by someone with a vendetta against the Harrisons. Perhaps you were simply an opportunist even then. Either way, your true identity raises serious questions about your motivations and trustworthiness. The boardroom erupted in overlapping voices, directors demanding clarification, William attempting to restore order, Victor pressing his advantage. Through the chaos, Emily remained still, her mind racing beyond the immediate crisis to its implications. If Victor was telling the truth, if she actually was Emily Blackwell, what did that mean for her place in the Harrison family, for her identity, so carefully constructed from the fragments of her past, for the future she had begun to envision at Harrison Systems? Patricia Whitmore's authoritative voice cut through the din. Enough. Whatever Miss Henderson Harrison's birth name might have been, it has no bearing on the financial evidence she's presented today. She fixed Victor with a penetrating stare. You haven't disputed the embezzlement allegations, Mr. Blackwell. You've merely attempted to deflect attention by attacking the messenger. Victor started to respond, but Judge Whitmore continued relentlessly. Furthermore, even if your identification claims are accurate, they suggest you've known this young woman's supposed identity for some time, yet chose to reveal it only when facing exposure for financial crimes. That timing speaks volumes about your credibility. Several directors nodded in agreement, the tide visibly turning against Victor's desperate gambit. William seized the moment, his CEO authority reasserting itself. Victor, you were invited to leave Harrison Systems with your reputation intact. That offer is now rescinded. Our legal team will be in touch regarding both the confidentiality agreement you've just violated and potential criminal charges. As security personnel appeared to escort Victor from the boardroom, he locked eyes with Emily one final time. Ask him about the investigation, he said cryptically. Ask William what really happened after the kidnapping attempt. Ask why the police report disappeared. Then he was gone, leaving behind a boardroom filled with stunned silence and unanswered questions. William quickly regained control of the meeting, addressing the directors with practiced diplomacy. Obviously, these personal allegations are disturbing and will be addressed privately. For now, I suggest we return to the business agenda. The remainder of the meeting proceeded with forced normalcy, though Emily noticed the sidelong glances, the whispered consultations, the careful distance directors maintained as they filed out afterward. Only Judge Whitmore approached her directly, pausing beside Emily's chair as the room emptied. Identity is more than a birth certificate, young woman, she said quietly. It's what we build through our actions and choices. Remember that in the difficult conversations ahead. When finally only the Harrison family remained in the boardroom, Emily found herself unable to meet their eyes. The compass pendant felt suddenly heavy against her skin, a symbol of direction that now seemed to point nowhere. Is it true? She asked finally, her voice barely audible. Am I his niece? William sank into the chair beside her, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. I don't know, Emily. The kidnapping investigation was extensive. We looked for any connection to Victor, to competitors, to anyone who might target our family. Nothing pointed to him then. But you suspected something, Emily pressed, Victor's parting words echoing in her mind. The police report. William sighed deeply. There were inconsistencies in the initial investigation. Questions about how the kidnapper knew Ethan's schedule, his nanny's habits. The detective suggested an inside source, but we found nothing conclusive. He reached for her hand. Emily, even if Victor's claims about your birth identity are true, it changes nothing about who you are to us. About what you mean to this family. Rebecca moved to Emily's other side, her elegant composure momentarily fractured by maternal concern. You're our daughter in every way that matters. No birth certificate or DNA test can change that. Ethan completed the family circle, pulling his chair directly across from Emily. Besides, he added with a ghost of his usual humor, being related to Victor Blackwell would explain your suspicious nature and financial genius. Silver linings. The attempted joke fell flat as Emily struggled to process the implications. If she was Emily Blackwell, had her entire life with the Harrisons been built on a lie? Had she been an unwitting pawn in some larger scheme? Or was this simply Victor's final attempt to destroy what he couldn't control? I need to know the truth, she said finally, decision crystallizing, all of it, no matter where it leads. In the weeks that followed, Emily approached the mystery of her identity with the same methodical precision she'd applied to uncovering Victor's embezzlement. She hired private investigators to track down her former foster mother in South Boston. She submitted DNA samples for independent analysis. She reviewed every document Victor had presented to the board, searching for inconsistencies or falsifications. William opened the original kidnapping investigation files, and together they re-examined every statement, every photograph, every detail of the day that had brought them together. Slowly, painfully, the truth emerged, fragmented and complex, yet ultimately liberating. Emily was indeed born Emily Margaret Blackwell, niece to Victor through his estranged brother. She had been placed in foster care after her parents' separation, but the DNA test revealed something Victor either hadn't known or had deliberately concealed. She was not biologically related to the Blackwell family at all. Her mother, desperate and addicted, had named Victor's brother on the birth certificate, hoping for financial support. The deception had worked until Emily's mother vanished completely, leaving her in a system that eventually placed her in the South Boston foster home she had fled at age 8, a full year before encountering Ethan in Beacon Hill Park. Most importantly, the reinvestigation confirmed beyond doubt that the kidnapping attempt had been real, orchestrated by a professional with connections to organized crime, hired by one of William's business rivals. Emily's intervention had not been part of any scheme. It had been exactly what it appeared: the instinctive action of a streetwise child who recognized danger when adults did not. The final piece fell into place when Judge Whitmore privately shared information she'd uncovered through her judicial connections. Victor had only learned of Emily's birth identity after William made her executive vice president. His investigators had discovered the connection while searching for leverage to use against her, not because he had orchestrated her presence in the Harrison family's life. On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 1 year after the board meeting that had nearly shattered her world, Emily stood in William's home office, watching as he signed the documents that would formalize what they had all known for months. The adoption papers, completed when she was 9 but never formally processed due to her lack of birth certificate, were finally official. The name change petition acknowledged her birth identity while affirming the person she had become: Emily Margaret Blackwell Henderson Harrison. The succession plan for Harrison Systems named her explicitly as William's chosen successor, with a clear path to the CEO position within 5 years. As William's pen completed the final signature, he looked up at the young woman who had twice saved everything he held dear. "When I found you in that police station 9 years ago, I thought I was rescuing a lost child," he said softly. "I never imagined you were rescuing me, rescuing our entire family, in ways that would unfold for years to come." Emily touched the compass pendant that still hung at her throat, its symbolism now richer and more complex. "We saved each other," she replied simply, "and will continue to do so." Later that evening, the Harrison family gathered in the living room of the Beacon Hill mansion, William and Rebecca on the sofa, Emily and Ethan sprawled on the floor as they had as children, though they were now young adults with futures stretching before them. They were discussing Ethan's environmental initiative for Harrison Systems when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. The housekeeper appeared moments later, expression uncertain. "There's a woman at the door," she announced. "She says..." The housekeeper hesitated. "She says she's Emily's mother." A profound silence fell over the room. Emily felt her heart rate accelerate, her body instinctively tensing as it had on the streets when danger approached. The investigation had found no trace of Catherine Blackwell, presumed to have succumbed to her addictions years earlier. Now, apparently, she stood at their door, a ghost from a past Emily barely remembered, arriving just as her new identity had finally been secured. William started to rise, protective instinct evident in his posture, but Emily raised her hand to stop him. "I'll speak with her," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions beneath the surface. As she walked to the foyer, Emily touched the compass at her throat one final time. Whatever came next, whatever complications or revelations this unexpected visitor might bring, she knew with unshakable certainty who she was and where she belonged. The street child who had saved a wealthy boy, the watchful teen who had uncovered a financial conspiracy, the young executive who had earned her place through intelligence and integrity rather than birthright. Emily Henderson Harrison opened the door to face her past, secure in the knowledge that her future and her true identity had been forged not by biology or circumstance, but by the choices she had made and the family she had both found and protected. In that moment, standing at the threshold between past and future, Emily realized she had come full circle. From observing the world from society's margins to standing at its center. From having nothing to protect to having everything worth fighting for. From a nameless girl with a bag of candy to a young woman whose name now carried the weight of legacy and promise. She had arrived saving, and she would never stop. Femme de Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily's extraordinary journey from the streets of Boston to the executive suite has touched your hearts and inspired you. Her story reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood, but by the bonds we forge through loyalty, courage, and love. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist of equally compelling narratives. You'll find it by clicking to your left. If Emily's transformation moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexities and celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. What moment in Emily's journey resonated most with you? Was it her brave intervention in the park, her discovery of Victor's betrayal, or perhaps the moment she finally embraced her complex identity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Until our next story, remember that sometimes the most remarkable journeys begin with a single act of courage.